Hey, welcome to CTV, Toxic Sky and the Breakaway Civilization. This is another one of our alternative CTV episodes devoted to things that some people consider beyond the pale of discussion, and we're tackling that again tonight. My panel tonight includes Lily Beardsley in the center here, just over this way, Lily. And yes, there she is waving. And we have the Noble Blue, also known as Mark Hammond, longtime panelist on my alternative topic CTV programs, and longtime member of the Society for Economic Equality, CTV, also known as. I'm Mark Zapotowski, and tonight, of course, we're going to be talking about chemtrails. And we're going to be talking about the UFO topic, which we've tackled many times, but we really haven't dealt with the chemtrail topic. We have a book to show you. The first book, as kind of some background here before you hear Mr. Dolan, Richard M. Dolan, speaking about the topic. If we could go to our first book. It's Aliens in America, and this is a book that's probably 10 years old. It's written by William Byrnes, and if we could zoom in on that inlaid photo on the cover, if we could, that special zoom in, I've actually seen the film that this is taken from, and there's actually film footage, if we could zoom in rather than zoom out, on the photo. The photo, you'll have to, yes, there it is. So there were actually aliens, at least we believe they were aliens. They were over the Capitol in Washington. They were over the White House. They were on radar. The local media was kind of freaking out. The Air Force had a press conference, and even the President of the United States said, well, they're not from this Earth, and we don't think there's anything to worry about. And it was the subject of a Jack Webb film that got its way into movie theaters, actually. And so that's a piece of forgotten history. The topic used to be taken much more seriously, and it made headlines all the way into the late 1960s, and then it really vanished, and it became, you've got to be a kook to think that there's anything involved here as far as the major media was concerned after that period of time. However, these days, you have people such as the astronaut Gordon Cooper, who passed away recently. You have also Edgar Mitchell, who passed away recently, saying, hey, the alien technology, the alien thing is a real thing. We're astronauts. We know about this kind of thing. Gordon Cooper was a Mercury and Gemini astronaut. Edgar Mitchell was one of the men who walked on the moon. He was a geologist. Buzz Aldrin tells us that, I mean, sometimes he says one thing, sometimes he says another thing, but Buzz Aldrin has said there's something to the alien thing and alien contact. Sometimes he says that. And then other times his pet project is that there's something artificially constructed on Phobos, one of the moons of Mars, and his pet project is that we should go there and find out what's there and pick up any technology on that moon and, you know, check out that artificial construction, a kind of a structure on Phobos that you can see on Phobos. And he's had photographs and models of the planetoid and of this thing. And he goes on talk shows and says that kind of thing. There's also, if we could go to our second book, this is The Day After Roswell. This is by Colonel Corso. And Colonel Corso wrote this maybe 10 years ago. He says that he was in charge of taking the Roswell technologies and integrating them into our technological and commercial society. So this is what he did, and this is what he said his job was in the US military. And the former Minister of Defense, so the Defense Secretary of Canada in the mid-70s, up to the mid-70s, a guy gee, what is that guy's name? Do you remember?
Which one?
The defense minister of Canada, former minister.
Yeah. Let me think about that one. I remember seeing him on film.
Hellier. His name is Hellier. His last name's Hellier. Anyway, he goes around saying this stuff is real, that he was the defense minister of Canada. And then sometime about 10 years ago, he read this book by Corso, and he said, what the heck? And so he called his friends who were American generals and admirals, and they said, well, this is off the record, but yeah, it's all true. We've had alien contact, we've done reverse engineering, we've integrated it, into commercial society, and so there you have another link as background here. And then we have this.
And Mark, Nick Pope worked for the British
Defense Ministry, yes, and he's another guy.
And he admits that there's things going on.
In 2001, the day before Roswell, or a few days before, not before Roswell, a few days before 9/11, there was a National Press Club event in Washington, D.C., and generals, admirals, governors of the United States, former heads of state of other countries, and astronauts and Air Force people were, they were in Washington and they were saying, this is real stuff. And then also, the day before 9/11, we had Defense Secretary Rumsfeld gave a press conference, and he told us that $3 trillion was missing from the US defense budget. And people said, well, how can $3 trillion in a $14 trillion economy disappear? And he said, well, this was over 5 or 6 years, and it's a big budget. You can't keep track of everything, which is ridiculous. But anyway, the next day 9/11 happened, and he didn't have to explain himself anymore because the attention span was all the way off to something else entirely. Well, it turns out 2 months ago, NPR said that $2.5 trillion is missing out of what is now a $16 trillion annual US economy. Also vanished into the Pentagon budget. They don't know where it went over the past 3 or 4 years or whatever. So that's all by way of background to this roll-in, and then I'm going to come back and take some comments from our panel on this. But this is Michael Dolenz, who wrote, if we could just show this other book, this last book, actually, we'll come back to that. We'll go right into Michael Dolenz. He wrote AD After Disclosure, and we'll talk about him and his book and another book when we come back. If we could go into the first roll-in, which is already queued up, and if we could see that anytime, Michael Dolenz, author of AD After Disclosure, and the subtitle of that book is When the Government Finally Reveals the Truth About Alien Contact. Okay, if we could hear that out here, that would be great.
Real head scratcher, puzzling, genuine UFO
could you get help
sightings.
to get them to put up sound out here for us?
So what's 3% out of a million? You tell me.
Probably very important.
I think, right? It's a lot.
Sound would be great.
Is that possible that there's 30,000 genuine UFO sightings a year? Yes, it's totally possible.
Because my panel
probably more
can't
than
understand
that.
what's being
This is
said.
a global phenomenon. And that's
They're
part
going to have
of
to
the
get help.
scenario. Of course, it gets no love from the mainstream media. So you've got this amazing thing happening every single day, worldwide, and no attention. It's as if it's just not there. I once thought of the analogy of Wonderland, Alice in Wonderland. So Alice sees the little rabbit hole and she falls down, 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 boom, and she's in this incredible place where reality is upside down. Well, we have Wonderland. It's when you turn on your television and you turn on your mainstream media. It's this fictitious reality. We live in the real world where there actually are UFO sightings. And you enter Wonderland, the media world, where this is not a thing. So that's part of our world. So yes, one part of the reality is in the classified world, there's been recoveries, and there have been military engagements as well as a global phenomenon. Some of these quotations here, by the way, these are just a few from Freedom of Information Act. acquired documents over the years. These are old ones from, this one's from 1950. Since July 30, 1950, objects round in form have been sighted over the Hanford Atomic Energy Commission plant. Air Force jets attempted interception with negative results. All units, including the anti-aircraft unit, battalion, radar units, Air Force fighter squadrons, and the FBI have been alerted for further observations. Holy smokes. If that had come out in 1950 when this was written, can you imagine the response the public would have given to that? When instead at the time the government was saying, no, nothing to see here. This is not a phenomenon at all. Well, clearly the public view and the classified view are two totally different things. By the way, the last statement that is on there says the Atomic Energy Commission states that the investigation is continuing. And what I've always found interesting about that is that in our acquired documents from the government, we never got any follow-up investigation. So clearly, there was one, but what was the conclusion? Well, we don't know what the follow-up was. And on and on. There's so many of these, and I don't want to belabor it. I've done that many other times. On my website, by the way, richardolanpress.com, I did one article which I still think is useful called 12 Government Documents. 12 documents that prove government interest in UFOs, and I've got like a top 12 there. So with acquired technology, ongoing classified engagements, you can imagine what our national security betters would think. They think this must be kept absolutely secret. This is too explosive, and that, I think, was their decision. That means control over media. That means control over the academic world. That means control over the scientific community. There are people who think, well, that's impossible, and I would just say, think again. It's really not that hard. You know, back in olden times, like the 1990s, when I started researching this pre-web, pre-internet, I think it was still hard for people to wrap their brains around the fact that the intelligence community dominated our mainstream media so completely. I don't think that's really difficult to argue now. I mean, really, who doubts it? We have a handful of media corporations that control about 80 or 90%, I think, of everything that you're likely to see, read, or hear in the course of your day. They dominate it. That's the media. Then there's the academic world and the scientific community, both of which have revolving doors with the national security apparatus. Scientific world, they'll never investigate UFOs if there's no funding, and if the subject's classified, which it is, then that means the funding will be classified. There's not going to be open public funding in the world of science for UFOs, aside from the fact that it's a known career killer, but there's just no money to do it. It's really not that hard to control it, in other words. So the UFO phenomenon is absent from those venues. It's very important. The phenomenon has also created the necessity, I think, in the opinion of the people running the show, the creation of black budgets. Black budget simply formally means classified federal spending that's beyond the purview of Congress. In reality, black budgets, I think, are a bit more than that. Black budgets involve all kinds of financial dealings that are outside government, including narcotics trafficking money, including banking fraud money. There's trillions and trillions of dollars at the center of the black hole of the world financial community that just go missing. And that's part of the picture, too. And it's not simply to run and finance the UFO program, although I think that's part of it. I mean, basically, if you want to raise secret armies, then you need a lot of money, and you don't always want to go to Congress for that. If you want to, you know, engage in regime change constantly, you may not always want that to be from your official sources of funding as well. So the whole role of financial fraud in this world, I mean, this is something that we really have not discussed, I think, intelligently as an adult group of people in the United States, but it's there. And again, the UFO phenomenon is part of that. This, I think, is part of the genesis of the black budget culture. Involving, well, as I just got ahead of myself, illegal financing, criminal financing, yes, cocaine import agency. That's what they do. Hey, look, what are we, less than 100 miles away from the Mena, Arkansas airport, right? Remember, not that long ago, a bit of infamous history, cocaine importation right here, right in the backyard. That went on, and that's beyond political party. I think we can all understand that. That's Democrat, that's Republican. It doesn't really matter. So, but all of that is important. It's important to generate the cash for research and also security. In fact, I had a conversation a couple of years ago with a very prominent scientist who told me point blank that the research on the UFO tech program
And
is
that's
very expensive.
Michael Dolan. Michael Dolan, who wrote AD, After Disclosure, and I have some feedback here. But if we could see his book, After Disclosure, which should be 4, I think. After Disclosure. Yes, number 4. Book number 4. Book number 4, After Disclosure, Michael Dolan's. Anyway, the title of his book that I recommend is After Disclosure, When the Government Finally Reveals the Truth About Alien Contact. And we do have quite a bit of problem with an echo and feedback. So maybe it's the volume on the TV is too much, I don't know. But anyway, there you have it, Richard Dolan.
Turn the volume down on the TV.
Yeah, it seems that it's on the side of the TV, right there, there's a volume control, and that seems to be some kind of problem. Okay, so Michael Dolan talks about the generating the black budgets, which I mentioned. Trillions and trillions of dollars go missing, go into the Pentagon budget, for we don't know where it goes. There's also, he believes, trillions, vanishing out of financial scandals that goes into this other development. Essentially, another civilization that could be a century or more ahead of what we think we have in terms of technology is actually the state of technology, because ever since the late 1940s, at any rate, the United States has been acquiring alien technology. Several alien ships have been shot down in our atmosphere. Actually, the U.S. used to send up planes to attack them, and a lot of pilots were lost in this whole operation to try and bring them down. So the U.S. did this in order to acquire the technology, and so there you have it. And if we could look at this last book, this is by Paul LaViolette, and this also somewhat goes into the history of anti-gravity propulsion and the U.S. Secret government and secret aerospace technologies. This is called Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion. Tesla, UFOs, and Classified Aerospace Technology. Paul LaViolette, if we could see that book so you know what it looks like. There it is. And an interesting fun fact is that in the 1950s, in the mid-1950s up to about 1960, aerospace trade journals, that commercial airliner manufacturers looked at, and they were saying that anti-gravity propulsion was here in the laboratory phase, and that in a few years it would be commercial. It never happened. But this is why people had the belief that, your car was going to be some kind of anti-gravity device. It wasn't just a Jetsons fantasy. It was actually something that, it was a real technology that was being developed. But where did it go? So this is part of that breakaway civilization. Okay. Any opening comments, Blue? Yeah.
It's a really great book. I mean, if you can recommend one book for people to read, that would be the book. Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion, because it goes scientifically back with formulas, mathematics, talks about the, who was the guy, Townsend? The anti-gravity devices and would shoot off into outer space? Thomas Townsend
developed, when he was in high school, in the early 1920s, an anti-gravity device. He had a device. He did it with some capacitors, whatever that is exactly, but he goes into some detail about this, their blueprints and such things, and from there on, he developed some little flying saucers and stuff eventually, and he was involved in the Philadelphia experiment controversy.
And the Nazi bell and all that stuff. There was another interesting character that was part of that whole scene too. I mean, besides Tesla, that Oh, it was Brian De Palma's brother. He did these experiments with spinning objects, and he found that if you could rotate objects fast enough, they would actually lose weight and begin to fly on their own. So just the rotation alone would create these radiation pulsations that would lift objects up.
Mm-hmm.
Brian De Palma, the movie producer,
His brother.
His brother. Yeah.
Well, Lily.
And a lot of these guys die, too. You know, remember the Philadelphia experiment, a lot of the scientists died on
Yes.
these early experiments because there's all this intense radiation that comes with this stuff.
Well, there were crew members on the ship, and they had sanity problems, and they had like dying of cancer problems and all that kind of thing.
Because it's a pretty unusual energy source, and there's many reports of UFOs having these same sort of pulsation pods underneath them, where they have these like domes underneath them that they use this technology. And the B-2 bomber on the picture, on the cover of that book, uses some form of this technology on the leading edge.
Well, strangely enough, you know, one of the stranger things that may or may not be true, but I found it one of the most remarkable things in this book is that LaViolette, the author, believes that from what he can see of the actual propulsion system and what's going on with the B-1 bomber, the stealth bomber, he believes that it could have space flight and even superluminal capacity, by which he means it could be beyond light speed capable.
Oh yeah, and Tesla talked about the same thing with gravity waves.
There is a British citizen that the U.S. wants to extradite to the United States, who, when he was 19 years old, invaded the Pentagon and NASA electronically through the internet, and he came up with a list of ships that were not naval ships, but he says that this is a space fleet that involves hundreds of crew members and listed officers and names of vessels, and his only conclusion is that the U.S. actually has an advanced
Well, why do you think
space
we
fleet.
haven't been back to the moon in 50 years? Do you think we really haven't been back to the moon in 50 years?
Or we've landed, what, a dozen or nearly a dozen spacecraft on Mars now, and no other society on this planet has been able to do that. And, you know, can anyone tell me that they know for certain that the U.S., if it's able to do that, has not landed people on that planet?
You remember that
I
video
don't think that we can say that.
from the Russians with the big ship that just before all the static came on the thing, there was this big cigar-shaped ship in the
Yes,
picture, and then
Phobos
nothing.
2 incident.
One of the early Russian probes. That's
Lily?
on the internet. You can look that up.
Any comments?
This is all kind of a little bit older than my knowledge, but I wanted to touch more on, from the roll-in, the kind of cover-up aspect and talking about how they control kind of what you see and what you hear, and control people's ability to look into this type of thing. Kind of harkens back to the thing that's going on now with the they're finding that a lot of Russian hackers and Russian bots have been controlling a lot of social media, and all sorts of Facebook pages and Tumblr and Twitter pages have been shut down because they were found out that they were actually Russian propaganda accounts that were trying to push people to vote a certain way in elections. And it kind of reminded me of that kind of tie into what's going on now, of things that you don't think are manipulated really are, and you kind of got to watch out for everything. Even just that stupid joke page you follow could be something more than you realize.
I think that's a very good point.
That's what the chemtrails are about, trying to keep people numbed out. Just like fluoride in our water. Grand Rapids was one of the first fluoride cities.
In fact, we had a 8 foot tall statue of a tooth, a bicuspid, on the Grand River boardwalk.
Yeah.
They took it down about 3 or 4 years ago for some reason. I think because celebrating this as the first fluoridated city in the United States was no longer a popular thing.
Male sperm count is half of what it was in World War II.
Yeah.
There's just too many, you know, Prozac society is, Prozac's 93% fluoride, sodium fluoride. You know, it just seems too convenient. I don't know if you remember a book called The Shape of Things to Come by H.G. Wells, I think it was. Or
It ended up being a film in the 30s, too.
They had a peace gas at a point because the world went to war, and then these breakaway society people came in. I call them the airmen, and they sprayed the whole planet with peace gas. And everybody started getting along, and everything was wonderful. You never saw that movie?
Oh, yeah,
Shape
I did.
of Things to Come?
I did. It's
And
classic.
then suddenly society turned around. It was all beautiful people and lovely clothing and crystal-like buildings. And then the poet comes on and goes, "Man was not meant to be this content with his life." And the whole thing starts crumbling again. So maybe there is some kind of rise and fall of these civilizations, you know, where they have to be destroyed in order to take the next step.
Well,
If you think about,
that's another topic.
Think about Arthur Clarke.
You were talking about contaminants, and actually I read this thing about how almost a lot of our big major cities, not just Flint, are having a lot of problems with lead in their water, other contaminants in our water, because our infrastructure is completely falling apart, and they just don't talk about it. And so you could be drinking water that isn't exactly as safe as you think, and you just wouldn't know.
Well, speaking of contamination, we're ready to go into the second part of this show, and this involves the second group of roll-ins on the second tape, the green tape. And if we could have that queued up as soon as possible, we're going to be looking at the chemtrail controversy. And I have to tell you, let me know when it's ready, but I have to tell you that 2 or 3 years ago, a friend of Blue's brought me out of a pub in Easttown, and she said that she could show me a chemtrail. And I was like, I don't even understand what they mean by chemtrail. So she pointed up to the sky outside of the place, and I said, that's a contrail. You know, that's not a chemtrail. Well, since then, maybe because she pointed that out and I had to think about it, I've looked into it. And, you know, I'm convinced that, no, there's something going on our skies. When I travel through Michigan into Indiana and across Ohio, and then back again, there's a lot of open skies. And sometimes the sky might be entirely blue and there's nothing in the sky. There's not a chemtrail to be seen. But other days, the day might start out that way, and suddenly these planes show up. And they crisscross the sky, and they make right turns, and sometimes they do curvy things, and they make grid patterns that look like a checkerboard. And I'm saying, this is insane. And year by year, it's intensifying. And once they've been working for a while, they take a sunny day, the weather people will tell you it's a sunny day, and you go, this is not a sunny day. And there's a diffuse chemical cloud over everything, and you can feel that the sunlight is impaired. It's not really coming down as it should. It's like 2/3 or 3/4 eliminated, and there's just something going on. And there'll be a rainbow, a big rainbow, around the sun, and right between the sun and the rainbow thing, this bullseye kind of effect, it's dark around the sun, and then there's this spectrum rainbow thing, and I've never seen that before, and it's becoming common. What the hell is this? People should look at the sky and realize that sometimes there's nothing there. If it were commercial traffic, it would always be there. But some days it's incredibly there. Okay, here we go. Yeah, let's turn that up. Let's bring up that sound. Okay.
Is the government experimenting with our weather? Question at the heart of a phenomenon called extinction, now getting widespread attention. Millions of tons of toxic poison released during the Cold War in the United States military conducted. The government is up there in airplanes, putting all kinds of chemicals that change and manipulate the weather, leaving what you see there, and they call that a chemtrail.
Geoengineering. They say that it's poison in the sky. Show high levels of these chemicals in our rain and soil.
Planes to spray chemicals into the atmosphere to
reflect the sun. And that's why health department records show a sharp increase in barium and aluminum in California's water supply.
We shall propose further cooperative effort between all the nations in weather prediction and eventually in weather control.
The Army's need
Okay, we're going to have another roll-in. This is from a film that is available on the internet. I found it on a Mirror site. It says it has no content of its own, but it's called the Scott Reed Channel. And the title of this particular piece is called Frankenskies. And it's quite amazing. There was another piece that was there yesterday and it's gone today. And so these particular videos have a way of getting taken down, and all YouTube will do is give you an exclamation mark and no explanation to why it's not there anymore. So hence the need for these mirror sites, I guess. Anyway, Frankenskies, and if we could immediately go into this next one, it'll be well worth it, and then we'll come back for a few minutes of panel discussion, and if we could, as soon as it's ready to go into the next, okay.
I would like to take you into the laboratory and show you a few of the experiments that led us to our outdoor experiments concerning
something about that type of work. Maury worked conducting experiments in cloud seeding aimed at determining whether or not weather modification techniques might possibly prevent lightning fires. Now, we carry this work on by seeding clouds with silver iodide nuclei. We disperse silver iodide from specially developed generators located either on the ground or on aircraft. Our experience has been that we can do the best job through aircraft seeding.
Again, man looks to his own efforts to increase the flow of water. Since the 1946 experiments of Dr. Vincent Schaefer, we have known that some clouds can be modified through seeding to yield additional precipitation. In 1961, Congress directed the Bureau of Reclamation to begin a long-range study of cloud seeding with the aim of eventually augmenting the nation's supply of water. The program, called Project Skywater, continues at many sites throughout the United States. Eventually, if the research program proves successful, the methods learned will become part of our nation's integrated water resources program.
In 1962, during the Vietnam War, American forces responded with Operation
Assembles a team of highly trained scientists and technicians to fly into your hurricane.
Scientists working on the project were convinced that they could reduce hurricane devastation using a process called cloud seeding by spraying the thunderclouds inside the hurricane with a chemical called silver iodide. This would become known as the Storm Fury hypothesis.
The seeding planes fly across the eye and into these clouds, seeding the supercooled water droplets from the belt of maximum winds outwards.
As the silver iodide turns the supercooled water into ice, the heat released during this process causes the seeded clouds to grow and develop into a new outer eye wall. At that time, the United States, Pierre Saint-Amand, was part of the team assembled in a top-secret cloud seeding operation known simply as Project Popeye. In May 1967, as monsoon clouds developed over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, Armand and his team put their new weapon to the test.
We get the material so that it fell into the growing part of the cloud, and it rained very heavily out of it, and everybody was convinced with that one experiment that we had done enough.
Project Popeye had opened the door to a new and dangerous type of warfare.
Some said, if you control the weather, you can control the world. Military planners imagined loading the clouds with radiological, biological, or chemical agents and having them rain on demand.
You could attack your enemy using the weather, but deny ever doing so. Allegations were made that cloud seeding had not only made jungle paths impassable, it had also killed thousands of innocent people. But this didn't stop governments from continuing to explore ways of modifying the weather. Sometimes, for highly questionable purposes.
That message calls for new frontiers, new vision. It calls for us taking the steps now that will make us no longer second in space and in science. It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world. It lays the steps that's necessary to provide a nuclear rocket that will produce benefits that are so unlimited that I couldn't tell you about them if I had all that.
July 1976.
Companies like Enron helped come up with this.
Scientists are trying to figure out a way to block the sun to try to slow down global warming.
Yeah, it's a measure of the feeling of desperation that some of them feel.
Are they really thinking they could do that?
Well, some of them are seriously proposing, and I think it's completely nuts.
Yeah.
You know, you put another kind of pollution, sulfur dioxide, up to orbit, cover the atmosphere. The sky won't be really blue in the way it is now anymore, but it would block out some of the sun's heat so that we wouldn't have to take the difficult steps to stop spewing all this global warming pollution into the atmosphere. And of course, there are a lot of problems with what they're proposing.
You could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up. And it's ugly tech things.
You could spray something into the atmosphere to change.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
How do you do this?
You start with a fleet of modified business jets and say 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year, and each year you have to put a little more, and this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in.
No, we'll get to it eventually. In the meantime, we're shrouding the earth in sulfuric acid.
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
We put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, but it'll be better if we put more in.
We're talking about 1% of that.
1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You could do math.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down, but it's a tiny addition of what we're already doing.
Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the end?
It actually turns out to be an old idea. This was known since President Johnson.
You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes with the contrails, maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now, and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
Seems extremely unlikely.
That the United States is not telling something to its citizens, that seems extremely likely to me. Read the newspaper. I think they might have your idea already.
This geoengineering idea, in its simplest form, is basically the following. You could put fine particles, say salt.
Okay, we have a little bit of feedback, and hopefully you can hear me. Right there, that was David Keith, and he's a guy who's been going around for the past few years to Colbert, to other people. He's been going to Britain, he's been going to Australia and New Zealand, he's been going to Canada, and he's here in the United States, and he's saying geoengineering, meaning having a fleet of planes to spray silver iodide, sulfur dioxide, and aluminum sulfate into our atmosphere as an aerosol at a high level in the atmosphere is a good thing because it will give us a chance to adjust our energy economy to a non-carbon-based form, which isn't going to work with Trump as president, I have to tell you, but scary thing. The thing is that for all appearances, it's been going on for years and it's intensifying. Okay, so comment from Lily first. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's kind of scary the way he talks about it like it's no big thing. Like, yeah, this is just what we should do and it seems like a good idea. He says it all very matter-of-factly, even when the host is like, yeah, but you just talked about, like, it could be dangerous. And he's just like, well, yeah, you can do but this is why we should do it. It's just kind of like glosses over that, and I thought it was kind of spooky. And then when the guy kind of mentioned that, you know, it's possible this could be happening now, right? He was like, well, no. And he was like, well, why not? I mean, we already have all these planes in the air, and it's not like the government tells us everything. And he just kind of shied away from that, too. So I don't know. It kind of seemed spooky. It kind of seemed like he was trying to sell us something that may already be happening.
Yes. I think at this point, it's obvious. When he appeared on Colbert maybe 2 years ago, maybe it wasn't so obvious. To me, it became really obvious last year because I garden. I have like a micro farm here in Grand Rapids. And so I'm out there for more than half of the year, and I see the sky. And very often I realize that, you know, there was a problem. There was a thin, diffuse cloud that got thicker and thicker as the day would go on. And this is a problem for agriculture. I mean, if plants aren't getting the sunshine, we're in a problem. And I was reminded at the time, last year, that I'd seen a video where a woman in British Columbia said that the forests are dying, and she related it to the spraying. Could be that it's the reduction in photosynthesizable light. Blue?
Well, let's take a look at the foundation of this. Do you remember Diane Rehm, from Diane Rehm show?
We have Blue here? Yes.
Well, she
can we get a shot of the area?
A person call in about the chemtrails, and there was a so-called expert on her show about the chemtrails, and he said there's no evidence of this, and she just bought it right up. You know, Diane Rehm. Remember Diane Rehm? She used to ask all these tough questions of these people. But a lot of these people are afraid of stepping outside of the considered normal scientific community. And
I mean, it's already really hard to get funding for different types of studies if it's not already something that's funded by a big corporation, let alone something that's more out there, like the idea of chemtrails or UFOs or anything like that. You just can't get funding for that type of thing. And if you're known as, even if you post one little thing about you being into that, you're blacklisted from getting on any normal projects as well. It's a career killer immediately.
Yeah, it's a career killer in the media, too. In fact, this particular film has lots of background sound you hear, and those are reporters, a lot of them local reporters who come across this story and they go, oh my gosh, you know, this is real, blah, blah, blah. Well, their careers get killed. They don't go to the network. In fact, they lose their local job even, that kind of thing. And if you're an academic, academia, the university, the college, it's not really about the truth. It's about social control. This is something that took me a long time to learn. And my own long academic career is, various a student seeking various degrees. You know, our world is controlled by a BS layer, kind of like the chemtrail layer.
Remember in Brave New World how they would put a little poison in society's cup? You know, nobody was born naturally anymore. Everybody was born in a test tube in Brave New World. But if they needed more, say, garbage people to pick up the garbage, they would put a lot of poison in your test tube. So you would only develop an IQ up to about maybe 80 IQ points. But if they needed more engineers and stuff, you'd maybe get 90 or 100 IQ points. People that became what they call alpha pluses were very few and far between because they were uncontrollable. They were always thinking for themselves, trying to do things on their own.
I read this short story once. I don't remember who it was by. It was a long time ago. But it was about a society where they wanted everyone to be equal. If you were, it was about this couple sitting on a couch and they were watching on TV ballerinas.
I remember that story.
Yeah,
yes.
but none of the ballerinas were very good because they all had to wear weights so that none of them could be better than the average person would be at being a ballerina. Or if you were too pretty, you'd have to wear something on your face. Or if you were too smart, you had to wear headphones that would make a beep noise every time so that you couldn't have any thoughts.
So you couldn't stand out. You couldn't propose a truth in the sense that other people weren't seeing.
Yeah.
That's how you would relate it. If we could go to our next roll-in, we might cut this one short. I think a lot of it is David Keith spreading his BS propaganda, but I might give you a flavor of that if we could run into the next one there. if that's ready to go. Okay.
5 particles, say sulfuric acid particles, sulfates, into the upper atmosphere, the stratosphere, where they reflect away sunlight and cool the planet. There's lots of mystery in the details, and there's some bad side effects, like it partially destroys the ozone layer, and I'll get to that in a minute, but it clearly cools down. And one other thing, it's fast. I guess the thing I haven't said about this is it is absurdly cheap. It's amazing how it can affect the planet. The one thing about this is it gives us extraordinary leverage. This improved science and engineering will, whether we like it or not, give us more and more leverage to affect the planet, to control the planet, to give us weather and climate control, not because we plan it, not because we want it, just because science delivers it to us bit by bit.
What is geoengineering?
It's really 2 very different things. One is ways that we would alter the amount of sunlight the Earth absorbs, and so cool the planet, partly offsetting the effects of carbon in the atmosphere, and that's called solar radiation management, or in some technocratic way, SRM. And the other one is to take carbon out of the atmosphere, so-called carbon dioxide removal.
Before we get on to solar radiation management, let me ask you about the carbon dioxide removal. A Royal Society report here in the United Kingdom back in 2009 said that no method of carbon dioxide removal has yet been demonstrated to be effective at an affordable cost with acceptable environmental impacts. And they only work to reduce temperatures over very long timescales.
I think that's exactly right, and I can say that both as an author of that report and as somebody running a startup company trying to capture CO2 from the air.
Before we get into the pros and cons of it, how solar radiation management might work?
Conceptually, it's simple. Doing it is not the hard part. You could use aircraft or other methods to deliver literally tons or millions of tons of very small reflective aerosols, tiny particles, say, to the upper atmosphere.
Spraying them out at a high altitude.
Correct.
Isn't one of the problems with the climate and studying the climate is that it's incredibly difficult to know exactly how it works. It is very difficult to model.
Sure, it's impossible to know exactly, but you can still learn a lot. So we actually ran a survey almost a year ago now that took data, high quality data, from 1,000 people in the UK, Canada, and the US to try and understand public support for research on these technologies and what kind of political leanings influence people's decision to be for or against. And in fact, we found pretty broad support for research.
But that particular opinion survey that you're talking about, it also came up with a finding that 64% of subjects agreed that humans should not be manipulating nature in the way suggested by solar radiation management.
Exactly.
Well, that would suggest that there isn't particularly broad support at the moment for the theory behind this.
There's not broad support for doing it, and I think that's quite a healthy thing. I mean, I'm one of the people who, maybe starting 20 years ago, most helped to open the door to get public conversation going.
How do you think, in that case, the public can be convinced, given that there is, as we saw with this project in Britain, tremendous skepticism, even about research at what you say is a very, very benign level?
Public opinion will evolve over a long time, and from my point of view, the goal is to try and make that public opinion be able to be shaped by facts as well as possible, and also shaped by people's values. It's not to promote this. So actually,
well, it is in part to promote this. I mean, you're a great enthusiast for this, and as you said, you have your own private company, which is...
And my private company works on a very different part of it, which doesn't suffer from these governance challenges.
But it is all to do with the issue of geoengineering. I mean, you know, it's an incredibly sensitive topic.
And I actually don't think my job is promote. My job is to help clear thinking and clear knowledge about the tools we have to regulate climate risk, among them this one. And I'm perfectly prepared to find the results show that we should never do this. So if it works, and again, we don't know it does, it provides some protection in the near term.
Isn't there a problem, though, that you could end up with different effects in different parts of the world? I mean, you could, for example, find that although you're reducing the amount of sunlight and the amount, therefore, that the Earth is warming up, and I want to come on to the governance, but I want to ask specifically about the science of this, which is how far can you tell whether the effects of solar radiation management are then going to cause perhaps a catastrophic loss of rainfall in a certain part of the world? At the moment, it seems to be hazy, this.
I think it's not as hazy as that. So using exactly the same climate models as we've used to estimate the problems with CO2 in the atmosphere, the underlying climate problem, we've applied those same models and same techniques to look at this. And the results so far, I have to say, look pretty good. That's why we're paying any attention to it.
Richard Branson himself, who owns the Virgin Airline Group.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or S.E.E., a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An S.E.E program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed S.E.E program would cost about $10 billion yearly. Now, I could go on and on and on and on about the things that fascinate me, but rather than talk about them, I thought I'd stop here.
Thank you, Senator. The Air Force has gotten great value out of HAARP in the past. It took over from the Navy and managed it and actually did a number of experiment camps to control it. But that work has been completed. The Air Force has maintained the site for other government agencies to use, are taking it over, including going out to academia.
International corporations are modifying our weather all the time, and they're international corporations are modifying our weather all the time, and they're modifying it in ways that cover thousands and thousands of square miles. Programs are impacting microclimates needed for our crops to survive and needed for pollination. The other issue is that a lot of times we're talking about mitigation for climate change. It's rather...
We can go back to her. Well, anyway, okay, maybe it's a good point to stop. You saw, actually, more of this guy, David Keith, trying to sell this proposal for something that's actually going on already, even at the time he was speaking. You also saw John Brennan in 2016 talking about something that was actually going on at the time that he was speaking to the Council on Foreign Relations, saying that it's such a great idea. Such a great idea that when they find out it's already going on, they say, wow, it's a great idea, so let's do more of it. That was the CIA director at the time, under Obama. You also had Rosalind Peterson addressing the United Nations, and she's saying that photosynthesis is being cut down. She's saying that trees are dying because of the pollutants reaching the roots, the aluminum sulfate, the silver iodide, the sulfur dioxide is killing trees. She's saying, and you don't see this part, but she says that aluminum levels, that sulfur levels are way up. You know, you have mercury levels way up in reservoirs in the western United States, in California and Arizona. You know, so what the hell is going on? And you know, no wonder these sites keep getting taken down. You can bookmark them, and like I said, you'll come back to them, and rather than an explanation, YouTube will give you an exclamation mark in a black box. And what does that mean? You know?
I want to talk a little bit about, there's been like a lot of big issues actually with YouTubers coming out and saying, we don't know what's going to get taken down. We don't know what we can post, that either they're going to take it down or it's going to be demonetized, because they're just, anytime a corporation or an advertiser or anyone tells YouTube, hey, we don't like this, then YouTube just cracks down on it immediately. And people are like, well, you could just post videos other places, but YouTube is one of the biggest hosting sites. People don't, so it's kind of like no one knows where else to post videos. If you post a video somewhere else, there's a good chance it's not going to be found. So it's an easy way for these big corporations to kind of cut down on things they don't want people to know about.
I mean, the controversy that Trump has generated, you know, and that actual fake malicious news has generated is very damaging, because it's already apparently killed net neutrality, and it's damaging the internet at a time that we really need it. I mean, there's an unfortunate aspect to internet freedom, but the benefits far outweigh the bad aspects, and we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
A lot of YouTube channels are like that were previously like news channels. They talked about serious issues like wars going on and atrocities and you know, the shootings going on in America, really serious issues, they were like, well, we just can't talk about that stuff anymore because YouTube does not like any type of videos that have any type of controversial anything. Even if it's just a news show talking about the facts of what's happening, it can still get taken down.
People have got to support internet freedom now more than any other time, or else we're going to go back to you know, a major media-controlled environment at a time that we can't afford it. Blue, your comments.
Well, you know, I don't even have a computer, so I don't have the internet, and I seem to get along fine with just reading books and watching movies.
But that's kind of, it's hard for you to learn about stuff that's happening all over the world as it's happening if you don't really have access to those types of things.
You know, kind of that's what history is about, too, is that the things that we take as being unique have happened before, like betrayal of a country by the leaders and lining their own pockets. That's been done as long back as they have.
Conspiracy is a real thing that does happen.
It does happen, and it has happened forever, really. You don't tell, you know, one of the reasons Hillary Clinton lost that election was because she was honest with the American people and said, you got to lie to people sometimes. Or at least tell different.
You have to have a public opinion and a private opinion
different
on some
versions of the truth to different parties. Bush or Trump is the biggest liar America's ever had, and Jimmy Carter just came out and said that's what America really wants, is a jerk like Bush or Trump. But we've survived all these people in the past. We've survived Caligula. We've survived Napoleon. You know, we've survived a whole bunch of people to get to the point now where we're on the verge of going interstellar with extraterrestrial civilizations. And I think the big point is that they're trying to numb us out so that we can handle that kind of a revelation.
Well, I think the danger is that if we lose the sun, if we manipulate the climate, I mean, we're already and have a danger of burning ourselves up. You know, we could become like Venus. We could become 250 degrees Fahrenheit and raining sulfuric acid. And to try and mitigate that by blotting out the sun with an artificial chemical cloud is very dangerous. We should just realize the danger we're in and
they want to
adjust
get
our
rid
society.
They want to get rid of about 7.5 billion people and get the whole population of the Earth down to about 500 million. This is the stated goal. A lot of these guys. So
the Georgia Guidestones.
Yeah, they don't want to have equality for everybody.
Well, this has been Oh Say Can You See, which is produced by myself, Mark Sabatowski, and the Society for Economic Equality. The show's been produced for the last 22 years. Hopefully, this will make its way to YouTube.
Yeah.
You'll see it, because it did not run live for some reason that I So, this show comes to you live the first, third, the fifth Wednesday of every month. And it's rerun every Tuesday on this channel from 6 to 7 p.m. And if you go to CTV Society on Google, find it on YouTube. We've got a site there. And also we're on the GRTV site. And we're on Facebook, and you can find our videos there. Or look for films and videos produced by Mark Sabatowski, and you can find it there too. Thank you for watching.
That's it.
That's it?
It's gone black.
We're gone black.
You're probably still on tape.
Are we still running the internet feed? Are we still feeding to the internet? Can you tell me? If so, okay, we did it. We cut it.
We're done.
Okay. We're done. All right.
train wreck from
Well, I can feel